When I was in grade 8, I started reading about crime, like true crime stories, and I got really interested in sort of how police and bad guys and all of this works. At school, I was a terrible student. So in grade 9, I discovered computers. It's like, how did I live without this? I would literally wait for my parents to go to bed. I would sneak out of my bedroom down into the basement where the computer was, and I would just play all night on this computer till 4 a.m. All these large companies offering me an insane salary. And then I had an intelligence agency offering me like 1/5 of that. And I was like, I want that job. I started August 28th, 2001. And 2 weeks later, September 11th happened.
I think the brilliance of Farnam Street, as well as the podcast, The Knowledge Project, it is so broad. A newcomer doesn't know what to think about it. But once they get in, they get hooked in. So I feel that how you have been able to encapsulate that into the blog and the interviews is just phenomenal.
The other thing I don't do is I don't use the platform for political or sort of purposes that would be beyond that curiosity. And we all know that not everybody in a city agrees. I don't want people to think what I think. I want them to learn how to think for themselves.
Today's guest is someone who has quietly shaped how millions of people around the world think. More than a decade ago, I had stumbled upon a blog called Farnam Street. What was curiosity turned into a guide for how I think, how I decide, and how I see the world. Shane Parrish, through his writing, his podcast, The Knowledge Project, and his books, has helped people to learn from students to CEOs on how to think clearly. This very podcast, The 1% Project, is an outcome of that impact. And through this podcast, I've been able to reach out to brilliant business thinkers from around the world. So it's a real privilege to have the man behind all of this thinking here today. Shane, thanks for being on the 1% Project.
Thank you for having me. Those are very, very kind words. Hopefully I can live up to them.
Your career started with the Canadian intelligence. How did you land up making that decision?
When I was in grade 8, I started reading about crime, like true crime stories, and I got really interested in sort of how police and bad guys and all of this works. And then I was a bit of a misfit at the same time, so I was always getting in trouble. At school, I was a terrible student, unlike my own children today. I was getting straight D's. My grade 9 teacher wrote in my report card that Shane would be lucky to finish high school. And she was probably right. And then I fast forward to grade 10, and I remember I was over at my best friend's house, and his dad, I won't say his name because I don't know if he wants that, but his dad sort of stopped me after dinner. We were at dinner, we were talking about university, and his son went to the bathroom, and I was sort of bringing my dishes to the kitchen. And his dad, who's like 6'4", 6'5", like stood in front of me, and he never touched me, but he definitely like pushed me up against a wall, just with his physique. And he's like, if you're not going to university, you're not hanging around my son. And I remember in that moment just going like, this conversation is nothing like what I have at home, nothing what I've experienced. And I don't even know what university is, but I do know it sounds expensive, and I have no idea how to pay for that. And he's like, I'll help you, not financially, but I'll help you learn about what it is and why it's good. And so in a way, he educated me outside of my home. And it was probably one of the few things in life that has just totally changed my trajectory. There's other little moments like that where we can all look back and say that influenced us. But fast forward to university, I didn't even know about university. So all these kids in high school were like, I'm going to do biology or science. And the only thing that I had found that kept me out of trouble was computers. So in grade 9, I discovered computers. And discovering computers for me was like discovering water. It's like, how did I live without this? I would stay up all night playing them. I would literally wait for my parents to go to bed. I would sneak out of my bedroom down into the basement where the computer was, And I would just play all night on this computer till 4 a.m. This is why I was doing so poorly in high school. I would sleep most of my classes. I had no interest in school whatsoever. It was just sort of like daytime babysitting. But at night, I could connect to the internet and these people around the world. And I was learning to program. So I was teaching myself how to program, how to code. And what I really wanted to do was, you know how video games used to have this code you would enter at the time? Yeah. I didn't have money. I couldn't pay for these video games. So I wanted to crack them. I wanted to hack them. I wanted to sort of do something different, you know? And so I started looking into like how to reverse engineer things, how to change binaries, like how does programming work? And this world I discovered would be my world for a long time. And it was the most exciting thing for me because it was fun. It was mentally challenging, kept me out of trouble. Kept me hanging around, from hanging around the wrong people. And when it came time to go to university, I was like, I just want to do computers. Like that's what I want to do because that's all I know and that's what I love. And then through that process, I mean, there's little moments in university where things changed for me, but the only thing I wanted to do was involving computers and using my brain in a way to help my country. I was super fortunate to grow up in Canada. I mean, talk about winning the ovarian lottery, being born in Canada. At the time I was born anyway, was like just this blessing. My parents worked for the military. So I always felt like, I was brought up to give something back to the world. And that was the way I could do it. I could use my brain. And so when it came to graduating, it was during the dot-com bubble. I had offers from Cisco and Nortel and like all these large companies offering me an insane salary. And then I had an intelligence agency offering me like 1/5 of that. And I was like, I want that job. I started August 28th, 2001. And 2 weeks later, September 11th happened. And, there's a couple of moments at the intelligence agency that just defined everything. And so September 11th was one of them. And then I worked with a guy named Matt Holland. And Matt Holland was, it's sort of like showing up to, work and having Michael Jordan on your basketball team. Matt was and is the most incredible mind in the world when it comes to computer operating systems and how they work.
In your career in intelligence, what did you learn about humans making decisions and the impact they have had or they will have in uncertain environments?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about how information comes and gets filtered through an organization, it goes through all these steps. It might come in as sort of raw material. And then by the time it gets to the CEO, it's gone through 6 layers. And each one of those layers has its own bias, its own understanding about what it can understand and what it doesn't understand. And so it just slightly distorts it each time. And if we're given the same information twice, we'll slightly distort it just based on, are we tired? Are we happy? Are we busy that day? Are we not busy that day? And if you look at that distortion, it causes an information gap later on in the organization. So often when we look at senior people and we're like, how could they make these decisions? There's 2 questions you should ask. 1, what information did they see? Because it's probably not what you're seeing. And 2, what's the goal they're optimizing for? So we have 2 embedded questions in that, right? We have a goal that we're optimizing for. And you see this a lot with political leaders. How can they make that decision? And you're assuming that they're optimizing for the goal that you're optimizing for. But what they're optimizing for, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but they're often optimizing for something completely different, right? They're optimizing to gain power and to stay in power. And that looks very different than what you're trying to optimize for in your head. So when you see somebody's behavior that looks different than you would expect, the best question to ask yourself is, what would the world have to look like for me to make the same decision that they're making? And then that creates a curiosity gap that you can sort of play around with.
And did you observe in that uncertain environment very smart people making poor judgment?
I think you observe a cross-section of humanity in the sense that there were a disproportionate number of extremely talented people by far and away non-representative of society in terms of intellectual capability, obsessiveness, attention to detail, all of those things. But that doesn't necessarily translate into better decisions, which is fascinating to me, because when you think about decision making, we often think that, smart people make good decisions and dumb people make bad decisions, and that's all there is to it. But there's so much more. There's so many more layers to this that you can unpack. And I remember when I set out, I got put into a lot of responsibility at a very young age, in part because of September 11th and just the nature of the organization. And it's like, you're in the building. It wasn't that I was qualified and people were like, you're super qualified, you're doing this now. It was more like, you have a heartbeat and you show up to work, so we need you to do this. And that's what everybody was doing. But I remember trying to learn about how people make decisions. So if my job is now decision making, like, I come from a world of ones and zeros and computer science and code. If code doesn't work, I know it's my fault. It's not the computer's fault. The computer's just executing what I've told it to do. With people, well, I mean, there's so many different variables with people to look into about how they operate and how they think. And I remember at the time, people's calendars were open. So you could just sort of like you could pick anybody in the organization, see what they were doing that day. And I would just go sit in these meetings in the back of the room, and meetings I didn't belong in, with our like most senior people. And I was like, what can I learn from them about how they make decisions? So some of the smartest, most intellectually capable people you'll ever meet. And it doesn't change the fact that we have certain biases when we make decisions. It doesn't change the fact that circumstances often dictate the decisions that we make. It doesn't change the fact that the quality of information we have often leads to our blind spots, or whether we have them or whether we don't. And so there's certain repeatable patterns, but it would take me years to sort of clue into that. My first step was to follow them around. When I realized they sort of put their underwear on the same way everybody else did, I was like, well, that's not the answer. And then I Googled it at the time, like you would. How do I learn how to make decisions? Because there's no course in university called decision making, or thinking for that matter. And so I went and did an MBA because I thought that would be the path to, prosperity. And it was about a weekend where I realized that I wasn't going to learn very much in that program. But I did happen to hit on Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. And I wondered, how these two people in Omaha have used decision-making in a way to create disproportionate outcomes. And are there more people like that have done that? And can I learn from them? And you can sort of go through the list of people, Rockefeller and Munger and Buffett, and there's modern examples like Cat Cole, and there's all these people who've done these incredible things. And what I really wanted to do was apply that inside the organization. So what can I learn about decision making from Daniel Kahneman and Charlie Munger, and take that and apply it inside of an intelligence agency, so that we get better outcomes with fewer people and reduce cost to taxpayer and reduce risk.
One thing that we before talked about, you mentioned in your ex-profession, the number one quality among your colleagues would be trust.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I was in an environment where everybody is vetted. So there's polygraphs, there's psych testing, everybody goes through this sort of vetting process. And the vetting process is really designed not about your competence, that's already established long before then, but it's designed to who can be trustworthy. And so again, it becomes a non-representative portion of society that you work with people who are just by and large generally completely trustworthy. That doesn't mean there's not sort of office politics and a little bit of jockeying that goes in, but by and large, people are not going to sort of stab you in the back and lie or cheat or steal.
Till you didn't mention that point, I had taken it for a given, unless and until I would be in a profession like that. But now I think of it, without trust, intelligence just won't work. You don't know what you can trust, who you can trust.
Well, in part, you could even zoom out a little bit and say the number one thing an intelligence organization should never do is lose trust with the public, because they're entrusted effectively to I wouldn't say break the law because they're actually following the law, but they're entrusted with a lot of information about people and, whether it's the police force or intelligence agencies. Trust is the most important variable in that equation. And if you lose trust, you'll quickly find yourself out of a job and in jail. I mean, you might.
That is true.
Yeah. But what a gift to be able to work with some of the most talented people of our generation in different domains.
And who are very trustworthy.
Well, they're trustworthy. Not only that, working with Matt was, like I said, you show up and Michael Jordan's all of a sudden on your team and he's looking at you going like, get to work. And you're like, I've been here like 3 hours ago. Why weren't you here 4 hours ago? Why isn't this done? And what it taught you, the most effective lesson I learned in all of this has nothing to do with decision making. It was really, you have these standards. And we are born with standards. We inherit them from our parents, our friends, our peer group, people we hang around. And those standards are like how much work I put in, what's acceptable, the habits that I have around it. And then you meet somebody who's next level. Yeah. And you get to work. Like I worked every day with Matt for 8 years, every day, 16, sometimes 17 hours. Almost all of our time together. He's still my best friend, but it changed my life in the sense of I can do so much more than I thought I was capable of doing. And it wasn't like he was pulling me forward with belief. Like that's not Matt's personality. But he sort of pulled me forward in what we're capable of doing. And I think that everybody listening to this is capable of more than what they think they are. And what would the world look like if more people gave 100% of the time?
That's a brilliant thought. And I was thinking about how much gets passed on from our parents. I have young kids. You have teenager boys as well. As parents now, I understand how much I am passing on and how much my parents have passed on beliefs which have come to me as gospel, right? Not question them. But that also basically creates a question that to what level should we be questioning these beliefs, these hand-me-down thoughts and ideas?
I think it relates to what do you want to get out of life? And if you want to get a lot out of life, then your life is probably not going to look the same as other people's. If you want to be happy, your life is probably not going to look this. What are you optimizing for? And I think it comes back to that. And the more you want out of life, the more you need to question those beliefs, because the more your life is probably not going to look like everybody else's life. And, if you want to be a little bit, you want your outcomes to be a little bit better than other people's outcomes, your life might look a little bit different than other people. But if you want a disproportionate outcome, if you want a 1 in 100 outcome, your life has to look very different than 99 other people.
That's a good point. Do you think if we want a lot out of life, can we be still happy?
Yeah, but I think it depends on the person. And the only thing I ever advocate for people is to be conscious about it and not to be unconscious about it. So there's no judgment about what people want out of their individual life. That's totally up to them. But I think a lot of people don't think about what they want out of life and what they're optimizing for. And that causes a lot of problems, including depression and anxiety. And, if you lack a focus, you lack a purpose, you lack something that gives you meaning, then it's a recipe for disaster, because you quickly turn to substances or other mind altering, and that can spiral really quickly. And so when we look at decision making, one of the things that I talk about in the book, it didn't get enough play in the book. And if I wrote the book again, it would definitely get a bigger section, but it's sort of positioning. And so the idea of positioning is, what are the circumstances I'm in at the time I'm making a decision? And that factors in a lot. So if we're hopeless and, we don't feel like we have a calling and we haven't thought about this stuff, that's going to change the options that we see in front of us. Whereas if we're driven to the point of ignoring our family, well, that's going to change the options that we see in front of us as well. And maybe that's better and maybe it's worse. Again, that's not for me to judge. But if we need to determine inside of us what makes us tick, what we want to try to achieve, and just really be comfortable being us. So many people aren't comfortable being themselves. They're putting on a show. And I call it putting on a show. And it offends a lot of people because they're like, I'm not putting on a show. And I'm like, do you ever say yes to things you don't want to do? And they say yes. I'm like, well, then you're pretending, right? You're putting on a show. And we do that unconsciously. So those are unconscious sort of decisions that we enter into because we want to be liked by other people, want to be respected by other people. And that goes back to evolution. So we have thousands of years of like, if you weren't in the tribe, you would die. And so the worst thing that you could do is like something to offend the tribe because that meant you were on your own, and being on your own meant certain death. And so we have an unconscious knack to say yes to things that we don't want to do. But if we're conscious about these things, we can have a huge impact on our life and the life of other people around us.
You kickstarted Farnam Street back in 2008-9. At that time, what were you trying to solve for?
Well, Farnam Street started after I hit on Charlie Munger and Daniel Kahneman and Warren Buffett and a whole bunch of other people. The idea behind the website was to take notes and to learn. And so one of the ways that we learn, or I specifically learn, is to reflect. So I would read these papers. I would read the shareholder letters. I was reading the Wesco letters at the time. And I would write about them online. And this caused problems because I wasn't allowed to have a website. Working for an intelligence agency at that point in time, you're not allowed to have a website, a personality. You couldn't Google me. Today, it's very different, but that was the case then. And so I had this online notepad, and I thought I was very clever because I would call it, what was it? It was 68131-1440.blogger.com. And I was like, somebody else owns that today, so don't go to that website. I just sort of gave it up. But the purpose of that was like, nobody's ever going to type that in. That's just me. That's my online notebook. And I didn't want to password protect it because I hate passwords. It's like one more thing to do. And I want to read it and I want to refer to it. And I want to sort of have spaced repetition. So I was taking what I was learning, and the seed of Farnam Street was sort of there. And I remember I knew Google had started to pick us up for whatever reason. I think I was one of the only people talking about behavioral science and mixing that with business. Obviously, I wasn't talking about intelligence or anything. And then all of a sudden we had, I would say, 25 or 50,000 readers within a couple years. We just hit on a certain search query at the time. And like half of Wall Street started reading Farnam Street. And it wasn't called Farnam Street. It was still like 68131, -1440, which is Berkshire Hathaway's zip code and their unit number in Hewitt Plaza, which a lot of people didn't understand at the time. So I would always get these complaints about, so that's how we became Farnam Street. I was like, okay, I'll just rename it. But I remember I was in trouble one day when my boss walked into my office and he had a printout in his hand and he's like, you should read this. This is really good. And I looked down and I was like, oh boys, I wrote that. But I didn't say that out loud because I wasn't allowed to have a website. And I was just like, oh. So he left my office and I called security and I was like, I have a bit of a confession to make. I've been running this secret web, they flipped out, of course. And they were like, what? Are you kidding? I was like, it has nothing to do with intelligence at all. It's, an online notebook and they're, yeah.
Actually, that takes me, if you're still in touch with your ex-colleagues, what do they think about you?
I mean, I'm in touch with the people. So of the team that originally did what we did and created that unit, I'd say there's a core of, let's say 15 of us ish. And of those 15 people, and this is a testament to Matt more than anything. I think of those 15, I counted last 9 have left the agency and went on to do something incredibly successful. And of those 9, I think I'm in touch with all of them. I don't know what they would say about me. I mean, I don't ask them, but I hope that they would be proud to have worked with me. And I would hope that that time in their minds holds the same place that it does in mine and my heart.
I'll be very intrigued to meet probably all of them and find out.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe you can get them on the podcast.
Maybe. Today, you reach 1 million people on a weekly basis through the Farnam Street, the Knowledge Project. How does that responsibility feel?
I think if I look at it through that lens, it feels big. But I don't look at it through that lens ever. I look at it through the lens of, what am I curious about? How do I share that with the world? And that keeps me from doing things that I know will be popular but won't really appeal to me. And it keeps me diving into multiple different subjects. So I don't look at the metrics on a weekly basis. I do look at them. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't. I sort of look at them quarterly for the podcast and for the newsletter, just to make sure we're sort of going in the right direction. But the way that I stay grounded in this is, if you reply to our weekly newsletter, it goes to me. I read it. I read everything. If I have a typo in a newsletter, at least 1,000 people let me know, which is very kind of them, but after the 5th one, you're like, I got it. I don't reply to everything by far, but I really want to interact with people and touch them about how our content's affecting them. I want to be useful to them, but at the same time, my primary desire is to be useful to myself. And then sharing that with the world makes it useful for other people. There's a whole bunch of people out there who like the same things I do. If we lived in a small town, I might not be able to do that. But since we live in this big global world, there's enough people who are just curious about life and want to explore different topics and just want to get better at everything. Like, I want to be a better partner. I want to be better at decision making. I want to be a better investor. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to narrow in on those one topic, which would make a podcast a lot easier, by the way, if you just have one particular topic. Or if you were to dive into sensationalism, that would also make it a little bit easier. But I just want to have fun, right? I get to pick the brain of the smartest people in the world for 2 hours a week. Sign me up. That's the most amazing job you could ever have.
I think the brilliance of Farnam Street, as well as the podcast, the Knowledge Project, is you exactly said correctly. When you say it's about decision making, it is so broad. A newcomer doesn't know what to think about it. But once they get in, they get hooked in. Yeah. And it could be a doctor, it could be an army person, it could be a dentist, and it could be a business person. So I feel that how you have been able to encapsulate that into the blog and the interviews is just phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. The other thing I don't do is I don't use the platform for political or sort of purposes that would be beyond that curiosity. And so some of that would add, if I sort of thought about 1 million people, that would add a lot of responsibility, because you're talking to a fairly large city at that point. And we all know that not everybody in a city agrees. And I don't want people to think what I think. I want them to learn how to think for themselves. And so everything we do is sort of with that lens to giving you the tools so that you can think for yourself and be better at home, be better at work, be a better parent, be a better partner.
Charlie Munger, somebody you cite a lot and has been an influence. What did he figure out about thinking that most people don't?
I think he figured out a lot about life that most people don't. I was fortunate enough to spend time with Charlie in person. And I think the things that I took away from that are all the things that he said publicly. But what he figured out is that everything is connected, that there's a few ideas that carry the bulk of the weight when it comes to thinking. And often we don't think that we should think. We just react, we respond. And Buffett said he was famous for his 30-second mind. And he was, and that's true. But people don't think about what created that 30-second mind. And it was created. And this is where I think a lot of people get wrong. Yes, he was above average IQ by far, but he also read more than almost anybody in human history. And he reread and he studied, he observed, he connected, he reflected on what he was reading. So, yeah, you can say he has a 30-second mind, but he prepared that mind over decades. And he went into an industry where the accumulation of knowledge matters a lot. And that's not always the case, that knowledge has a long shelf life. A lot of us are in industries where the knowledge is short-lived. It might last a week, it might last 2 weeks, it might last a few months. And then we're constantly on this treadmill where we have to run and run just to stay in the same place.
It's a miss. I know that he was supposed to be on the Knowledge Project. And I was looking forward to, if that would have been recorded, it would have been...
The day he passed away, we actually had a call scheduled to plan it, which is, yeah.
Well, you have captured him as well as Buffett very well. So definitely his thoughts and his core ideas and beliefs, I think, are going to outlive all of us.
Yes.
How do you see Berkshire Hathaway's performance in the present era?
Performance in what sense? In stock price?
Yeah, in its performance, it's rather returns.
I mean, I don't know if I know enough about the intricate details of Berkshire Hathaway. I mean, I own a few shares, but I don't track it religiously. I want, I think no company has thought more about their succession than Warren Buffett, and Greg Abel is an incredibly competent person. And I think people underestimate him. It's interesting because when I think about Berkshire, I sort of do things around Berkshire, I'll give you an example. Greg's letter came out and I was like, oh, I wonder if AI can tell me about the person. And so I ran multiple psychological assessments of him using an AI tool that I created just through the letter, and that doesn't take that information to be, more valuable than what it is, but it's sort of fun what are the differences between Buffett and Abel based only on the words that they write on the page? Because words, when you write them, are a reflection of how you think and how you talk. And, one of the observations that came out of that was Greg's sentences when he talks about operations are very short, and when he talks about investing, they're much longer. And I thought that was really interesting, right? I don't know what that means, but I think that Berkshire Hathaway is in really good hands. And they're an example of somebody who's just perpetually positioned to take advantage of whatever the world throws at them. And if you think of positioning as a core concept in decision making, which I do, the concept of everybody looks like a genius when they're in a good position, and even Warren Buffett looks like an idiot when he's in a bad position. And I think about that a lot in the sense of Berkshire Hathaway, because they have almost 400 billion in cash on the balance sheet right now. And if you think about that in terms of if the economy thrives, they're going to do well. If the economy stays the same, they're going to do well. If the economy tanks, they're going to do great. So there's this, they're going to survive. And one of the things that I think people don't understand enough about business is that the only goal is survival. If you can survive long enough, you will be prosperous. And I think that most people optimize for the short term. And when you optimize for the short term, you're predicting the future. And when you predict the future, if you're not right, it can jeopardize sort of the long term. And the way that I think about this is the best path in the short term and the best path in the long term, in a lot of ways, are completely different strategies. And if you're optimizing for the returns of the moment, it's going to look very different than ultimately optimizing for ultimate returns. And I think that they take a longer term mindset than anything else. With that said, I bet you they built up cash for a variety of reasons, one of which is the market seems overvalued in a lot of ways. And the second being, I bet you Buffett wanted to hand Greg, I mean, this is just my personal hunch. I have no inside baseball here. I bet you he wanted to hand him a lot of paint.
We talked about thinking, decision making. What does thinking well in a practical environment look like?
Well, it means thinking first and foremost. I mean, you can pick out a million different threads of this, but like in a lot of meetings, if you don't answer on the spot, people think you're incompetent. There's a machoism to sort of being able to respond quickly to something you didn't anticipate, even though there's no need to respond quickly. So often when we think we're thinking, we're just reacting. And I think that that's one of the things that people really mistake about thinking. And those are the ordinary moments that get us into trouble. And they get us into trouble. It's not because we have bad intent. It's because we make an instinctual response to a decision that may be 70% correct, but it causes all these problems down the line because it's 70% correct. And have we taken time in the moment to pause, to reflect, to gather our thoughts, to search for our blind spots and try to find out what information we're missing, we would make a decision that might be 90% correct. And the difference between those two is going to be insane in terms of the time that we have to spend later fixing our mistakes, the organizational loss of energy towards a direction. If you think about sort of a vector speed towards a direction, you can run around in a circle right here and you're going really fast, but you're not going anywhere. And so what we want to do in work and life is move towards a direction. And every time we make a slightly off course decision, it's just a little less energy towards that direction. And people think this slows them down. And I worked in one of the fastest paced environments possible. And I can't tell you enough how much it speeds you up.
But it is exhausting as well. I think when somebody kicks off this whole thought process of thinking, better decision making, it's not easy. It takes time. It takes a lot of patience. I think thinking takes a lot of patience, a lot of introspection before you really boil down to what exactly you want to do and what should be the next steps. So if someone who has to start tomorrow to be a better thinker, what would be that one habit that you would advise?
Write down your thinking. I mean, take a pen and paper and a notepad or a journal and just write out your thoughts. It sounds so trivial, but it's so effective because often how you understand something in your head doesn't make sense, but you don't know it makes sense because you're literally in your head. But when you start writing it down, two things happen. One, you slow down your brain. And that's why I say write it by hand. One of the reasons to write it by hand, but you slow down your brain. And two, you can read your own writing and, oh, I don't know this. This doesn't make sense. Why am I using this word here? And this idea is no good. And through that process, writing is the process by which you learn that you don't know what you think you know. And you learn where to go to find out what you need to know in order to make a decision. AI can help you and it can hurt you. It's neutral in terms of what it does. It doesn't have, at least not yet, sort of, it's like a habit. A habit can be good, a habit can be bad. It depends on what the habit is, and it depends on if it's serving you or if it's working against you. And AI is the same. If you're a writer and you're using AI to write your pieces and you're not adding any value to that, I would say that that's probably going to be a problem. If you're using AI to help you think through things, and I'm happy to give some examples of how you can do that, I think that that's beneficial because then it's surfacing blind spots. If you're using it to test your thinking, a great example of how my kids use it or how I tell them to use it is you write the essay, then you give the essay. You do a good job. You do a couple of revisions, and then you give it to sort of AI. And you ask for feedback, pointed feedback and steps. Where is it weak? Where is it strong? What would make it better? They're clever. They pass it their little grading rubric from school, and it's surprisingly accurate. It's like, oh, you're going to get an 87 on this. But if you make these 3 changes, you'll get a 91. And these changes, it'll be like, these changes take 2 minutes, and the kids are like, yeah, 87 is great. And I think that we can use it as a partner. There's always going to be a market for insight. There's always going to be a market for taste. If we outsource all of our thinking to AI, we're going to be less valuable. So in a world of intelligence available on tap, if AI is doing our job for us, I would be super scared, because why do they need me? Just to hit forward or like copy and paste from an email into AI? Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so where is it that I add value, and what skills are going to be necessary or more valuable in an AI world? So you think of community. This is one of the reasons that we started doing video podcasts. I hate being on video. I hate being the center of attention. I hate people looking at me. I just don't like that stuff. I hate being on the podcast art, but in a world where you can generate AI content that's indistinguishable in some ways from real content, I think it's more important that people know it's me and they have a relationship with me. And that's sort of behind that choice. But I will say, we've inserted, we do these podcasts every second week called Outliers, where we talk about a business person from the past, and we deep dive sort of like a bit of biography, a bit of personal mindset stuff. And in those, they're sort of like scripted essays. And we've inserted up to 20 minutes of AI. We don't do it anymore. But I wanted to test whether people could figure it out. My parents couldn't even figure it out. So we had an AI sort of synthesize my voice. And only one person out of 100,000 emailed me and was like, was that AI? Because you normally say this word differently than you did in this episode. And you normally mispronounce it, and it was pronounced correctly. That's how they knew, or at least they had the instinct that it was AI. And so in that kind of world, I think knowing about the person behind it and having that relationship is going to be more important, not less.
Over the years, you have read, practiced multiple mental models, thinking processes. Is there one which has dramatically or drastically changed your view about the world?
I think the incentive cost bias is probably the one that helps me understand things the most. And by understand things, it means seeing things as a system where people are often optimizing for what's in their best interests. And their best interests are not necessarily your best interests. And what you think are their best interests aren't always their best interests. But if you pull it apart and look into what they're optimizing for, this sort of goes back full circle to what we were talking about earlier, then I think you can understand people better. But incentives will cause a lot of poor behavior and a lot of good behavior. And they're really, really hard to get right.
The Knowledge Project podcast. You have interviewed some incredible thinkers. How do you distinguish between people who give you advice versus really knowing the world?
In what sense?
In the sense, there are people who have probably ready to give advice at that given point of time. They sound intelligent. Versus people who really understand the world and have a much more holistic view.
It's interesting. I think of this in terms of fluency. There's people who, let's use Buffett as an example again. So there's a lot of people during the early 2000s and, even up to 2021 who tried to imitate Buffett. They tried to think like him. They tried to write like him. They used the same words as him. But when you fast forward to the financial crisis or COVID, they're unable to act like him. And I think that is really interesting. So one of the key skills in life is, how do I distinguish between the person who knows what they're talking about, and how do I distinguish between the person who sounds like they know what they're talking about? And the most amazing thing about the Knowledge Project, because that's sort of the root of the question, is I just don't air episodes if I think people aren't as competent as I would have thought going in. And there's, a whole cohort of episodes that we've recorded and they just don't make the light of day. I don't want to make anybody look bad. And if I don't think that they're like, if I didn't learn anything, or I don't think, I'm like, wait, how are you CEO? Like, this doesn't make sense, you should know the answer to this. Then, the minute I start thinking that, I'm like, we're just not going to air this podcast and I'll end the interview. Like I'll end it quicker than I normally would. And that doesn't mean I'm right. But you can tell when people, it could just be they're not feeling it that day. They're preoccupied with something. Again, what would the world have to look like for me to behave that way? You're preoccupied. Maybe your brother is in the hospital. You're short. You're not detailed or nuanced. But often, if you don't know the answer to questions that I would expect you to, at multiple depths, you should be able to go all the way from the ground to the 50,000 foot view. And I'm really skeptical of the people who stay at the 50,000 foot view and talk in abstractions and get frustrated when you ask follow-ups, or when you ask for more detail, or you ask them why. Those are sort of the mark of a charlatan, if you will.
That brings me to ask, which would you prefer more, timely advice or worldly advice?
Well, it depends on, I'm going to reframe that because I don't look at it through that lens. If I want to learn a particular skill, I want timely advice. I want somebody who just did the thing that I want to learn how to do, because then it's in the same environment that I'm trying to do the same thing in. The advice is more likely to be correct and accurate and applicable, and something that I can learn from. If I go to somebody who did it 40 years ago and they tell me how they did it 40 years ago and I try to apply that today, it's unlikely to be successful. Now, let's flip that around. If I go to somebody who's 1 year ahead of me, or one step above me, and I ask them for life advice, I'm going to get a very different result than if I go to somebody who's near the end of their life, at the end of the maze. They're going to give me more timeless life advice. And so I think I just want those two different types of people for different things. And I think we often carry over one part of intelligence to the other. So we think if you're good at your job, you must be good at life. You must be a good husband. You must be a good wife. You must be. And so I want all my advice from you. And I think it's more specific than that. And it's like, what is this person world class at? How do I use that information? Or how can they help me get what I want, in a sense? And then who's better for perspective? Like, who's actually had a happy marriage that's lasted 50 years? Okay, maybe they're going to give more or better marital advice than somebody else. So I think it relates to what type of information do I want to acquire, and who do I go to find that information?
That actually reminds me of a friend of mine who really has that segmentation. When he needs personal advice, he goes to someone. When he needs business advice, he goes to somebody else. Initially, when I knew of this, I couldn't reconcile myself. I was like, why does he do that? And when the person he's taking life advice from comes to know that he is not referring to that person when business advice has to be taken, will that person feel betrayed?
I don't think so. I mean, what do people think when you ask them for advice, right? They think how smart you are, really, because you must be smart. You're asking me for advice. And just having the honor of being asked for advice in one domain, I think it would be I would react poorly to somebody who reacted that way. How's that? I would start to rethink if I knew them or understood them, or whether they should be close to me. My instinct would be sort of like, are they showing signs of their true self? And it's okay when people do that. Occasionally people make their way into your network of people, your friends, your close friends, and, they're not really rooting for you. And I find one of the key things for my happiness of life anyway is not to have those people close to me. And when you find somebody who's not really rooting for you, who's not happy for your successes, then you should remove them from your circle. And this comes out, nobody ever comes out and says I'm against you, but it comes out in passive aggressive comments. It comes out, and this would be an example of a comment that for me would sort of trigger something inside me and make me start thinking more about that person.
Your book, I think I have, if not the first copy, the first week's copy.
Oh, I appreciate that.
And it has been endorsed by everybody who could. James Clear, Brian Holiday, Adam Grant, Annie Duke. And this is the OG of mental models as well as clear thinking. The question I have, it has a very simple premise, which says ordinary moments can turn into extraordinary outcomes. What does that mean?
So often we think we need this one big flash of insight, this one big moment where everything in life is going to change. And that drives a lot of poor behavior. I think a better way to approach everything is that the ordinary moments are small, but they add up and they accumulate. And they determine the position that you're in, they determine the options that you have. And if you look at life through the lens of time, you really just want to compound over time and get better and better. And what do we know about compounding? Well, we know that all the gains to compounding come at the end. The last double is effectively as big as sort of the first, all the steps to get there. And this is, the stat that crystallizes this. I think it was Morgan Housel who told me, 97% of Buffett's net worth came after 65. And people don't realize the power of compounding. Like we don't understand nonlinear exponential curves. And I think that if we frame things in terms of big decisions, we're generally rational. Like we generally think about them. But what we don't think about are all these little moments, these ordinary moments. And I think they're much overlooked for how people actually make decisions in the real world and what causes problems in the real world and what gets in the way of our success.
One key takeaway that I have from the book, if you can double click on that as well, always focus on the optimal outcome versus being right.
I think of I crystallized this in my head as outcome over ego. And it became apparent for me when I worked at the intelligence agency. I saw myself as a knowledge worker. And if I see myself as a knowledge worker, then I have to be right. Because if I'm not right, what am I? I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'm not a knowledge worker, because those two things don't go together. And I remember just catching myself. I think maybe it was Matt who caught me, but I just remember working really, really hard to prove myself right. And he's just like, you're wrong. Like, give it up. Like, that will get to the right outcome, but it's like so convoluted and complicated and, 30 steps when it should be 3. And I just, remember like going home and reflecting and writing about that and like, what is going on here? And like, why is my brain doing this? And it really boiled down to my ego. So often we want to prove ourselves right. And we want to prove that our idea was right. We want to have an I told you so, even if the organization sort of moves against us. And we'll actually unconsciously work towards that I told you so. So when we think of all that energy going towards directions, well, part of our energy is kind of going into proving it wrong. And so I frame this as like, what's the outcome I want and what's the best path to get there? And my idea is usually not the best idea. And it's taken me a while to sort of crystallize that and learn it. And you learn it in all sorts of ways. But when I left the agency, I really learned it because I had a team of people that I'm working with, and I really just want to be successful. I don't want to have to go hat in hand back to the agency. And I think that we often think two things about ideas. One, that we have the best idea, which is nearly impossible. And two, our first idea is the best idea. And so I think that, learning from other people and allowing that space, and I frame it in terms of blind spots and all of these other things, but you really just want to surface the best idea and get to the outcome the best way possible.
You have built Farnam Street and the Knowledge Project for over 15 plus years. You would have taken and made a number of decisions. If you look back, do you think there were some things you would have liked to do differently?
Yeah. I wish I would have started a newsletter differently. I mean, we can always look back and sort of look at things where, whether it's an investing mistake that I've made or sort of with the business. And we always look back and we're like, that could have been different. But by and large, it's worked out pretty well. And I rub my nose in those things, but I don't want to also like have them as anchors. And I find with past mistakes, people often acquire anchors. And you can think of a ship sailing across the ocean. And when you make a mistake and you don't let go of it, you drop a little anchor in the ocean. And that ship keeps moving. But like we all make a lot of mistakes over the course of our life. And eventually, if those anchors get too heavy, then we start to get into analysis paralysis. We don't want to make decisions. We're scared. We're risk averse. And so I think of it as like cutting those anchors. And this is how I visualize it in my mind. How do I get rid of those things? And so, yeah, like I wish I would have started earlier. I wish I would have worked harder. I wish I would have recorded the audio quality better at the start. I mean, I look back at my early conversations and I'm like, oh God, like I was so terrible. Why did people listen to me? I was really bad. I was curious and genuine. I think that carried people into it, but I was bad at articulating things. I didn't formulate clear questions. I would often ask multiple questions in the same. Like there's so many things that I look back on when I listen to myself and I'm like, why did you word it that way? But it's okay to do that and also let it go and learn from it, right? And so I think there's an element of like hearing yourself and looking back and rubbing your nose in it to some extent, or in my case, I'll still listen to back episodes, but it's not as an anchor. It's more as like an informative. What kind of questions did I used to ask that I don't ask anymore? And these are the tools that AI is like super profound at, because I was like, here's 250 episodes of a podcast. Tell me my personal trajectory, my blind spots. What don't I see? Where was I better before and where was I worse in the mind of AI? That doesn't mean AI is correct. But it can point out things that you don't see about yourself.
Of the many things that I learned from Farnam Street and the Knowledge Project, one thing, what I learned is, and listening to you, is most of the time in a podcast, after a certain period, the listener comes back to listen to the host because they align and think, or they share the same values as the host rather than the guest. Do you think that's true?
I think it's changing in the sense that more people are being guest driven by and large than host driven. We see this when we release a popular episode with a guest that, is more popular. That doesn't mean they're a better guest, but it does mean the algorithms pick up on them more because the watch time is slightly different and that cue's sort of like getting shown to more people. Their name is searched more, so it pops up more naturally. I also think it's sort of a road to ruin in a lot of ways to only do that sort of thing. I think the host carries the core audience and not sort of the people who are traveling through the city. The host is like the mayor of the town or city that they're in, and people move there for the host. But there's a lot of travelers who sort of go through the road, and some of them will stay, and some of the people who live there are going to move. As your tastes evolve, your needs evolve, what you're interested in evolves. Like what I was interested in 10 years ago looks very different than what I'm interested in today. And what I'm interested in a year from now is probably going to look different than what I'm interested in now. And I sort of go through these phases, and we just go through phases in life. And I think if you're trying to please the audience, it would become a lot less fun and it'd be a lot less genuine about just sitting down and talking to the best people in the world. And I look at it like I'm trying to pick your brain. Like, this is amazing. I just want all the information I can. And as much, in a way that's different from most podcasts, I want detail. I want nuance. I want a long form conversation. I'm not just going to clip it and put out the best 30-minute version of it, which maybe I should. Maybe that would be more popular. But I really want to make a world where people have access to the highest quality information possible, freely available, so that they can learn from anybody. We live in the best time in history. You can go learn from we have so many CEOs and founders who come on our podcast. You can go learn from Patrick Collison. You can go learn from Toby Luque. You can go learn from all of these people in real time, direct from them with no middle person, no reporter, no anything. How do they word things? How do they phrase things? How do they think about things? You listen to them and I don't know, man, like that's just so cool to be alive right now.
Can't agree more. And that insight has driven me to do this podcast. So thank you very much.
I'm glad you're doing it.
On the flip side of this, we are in a flood of information. How do we search for signal through this noise?
I think if you're fluent already in a topic, you know how to find signal. And so if you're struggling to find the signal, I think it's a sign that specifically, like if you're looking for information, you're struggling to find signal, it's a sign that you don't know what you're looking for, and you might not be as fluent in that topic as you want. And I think that we all need to curate the information that we let into our life, just like we curate the people that we let into our lives. You're not going to let a drug addict become one of your closest friends. Why not? Because you want nothing to do with that. But you'll let people with crazy thoughts and ideas permeate your social media. And the way that I've changed social media has changed a lot in the last few years. I no longer sort of like go algorithmically, lists of people that I follow and check into. And every quarter, at the very least, every 6 months, I go through that list religiously and I pair it. I get rid of people. And one of the reasons I don't follow them publicly is because when I was getting rid of people before, I'd get an email from somebody, well, why did you unfollow me? And the real thing is like, I don't like where you're going, or you're too political, or, you're just talking about things that don't resonate with me. Having that conversation is really hard. So if I don't follow them publicly and I follow them on a list, it makes it much easier to sort of remove people. But we really don't think about the information that we let into our brain. But that's sort of the first thing that comes in that we're going to use as raw material to formulate thoughts. And we often look at like, how do we think better? But part of thinking better is actually, how do we have better quality ingredients coming into our mind to begin with? Is this person fluent? Do they know what they're talking about? Are they curious? Do I like them? Can I trust them? And coming back to the podcast thing, I think people just trust me at this point to curate over the course of a year a wide range of guests talking about a wide range of things. And they know they're not going to agree with everything. And they know they're not going to disagree with everything. But they're going to come away from the 90 minutes listening to it smarter than they were before.
Do you see yourself as a librarian for smart and in-depth thinking? Because you just mentioned that listeners and readers look forward to a 1 year worth of very high signal.
Have you watched Ready Player One?
No.
Oh, you got to watch that movie. So in that movie, there's a curator.
Uh-huh.
And the curator's job is to help people find information, but they're not creating the information. I sort of view my job like that. I want to help you find the highest quality source of information in the world, the densest, most detailed. I want to put together the best business curriculum, but I'm not the teacher. I'm your guide. I'm sort of the curator of this information for you.
That actually takes me to a point in the book where you mention that one should have a hypothetical board of directors or advisors, right? In today's time, who would you choose to be on that board?
Well, I have multiple boards and I use them on AI now. So I have little agents for different personalities. So I have like a Charlie Munger sort of persona. I have a Richard Feynman persona. I won't get into all of them, but I have different. So coming back to use different people for different things. So I have assembled this group of personas and I use them for different things. But what I'm really doing in both cases is, how do I uncover my blind spots? And if you think about poker and playing poker, if you're listening to this, and imagine there's 5 people around the table and each person has a different set of cards. I have some information, but not all information. I can infer some information, but not all information. So I have a lot of blind spots. And if I know one other person's hand, well, now I have fewer blind spots. I'm going to play better. I'm more likely to win, or at least not lose. But if I have everybody's cards and I can see all their cards, well, how often am I going to play the wrong hand? Never. I might still lose because I didn't get the best hand, but I'm never going to make a mistake. And I think if we think of a personal board of directors, the idea is, how do we keep ourselves grounded in what really matters to us? And how do we uncover our blind spots? And so you need, if you don't have friends in your life, and I'm very fortunate to have friends who would call me out if I ever sort of went off astray, right? Like if Biggie has a line, he says, never get high on your own supply. And I love that line. The 10 crack commandments, you could make an MBA out of the 10 crack commandments. Don't get me started on that. But, I love that line because it's so often we do, right? You get a million people reading your newsletter, or you get a podcast that's been listened to 18 million times, one episode. And it's so tempting to sort of be like, oh, I got it all figured out. And if you surround yourself with people who are like that and sycophants, then you're definitely going to trend in that direction. If you surround yourself with people who are the opposite, and maybe this is just my case, but, I remember when we hit 1 million newsletter subscribers, I told my mom, and she was like, well, what's the population of the city you're in? I was like, 1.4 million. She's like, yeah, so they have more than you. And I was just like, oh, Mom. But, there's an element of that sort of like keeps you in check and keeps you humble. And I appreciate that about her. And I think that it's really important that we use a board in that sense, especially real people, to sort of calibrate ourselves in our direction. Am I being the type of person that I want to be? Am I living the type of life that I want to live? And ultimately, relationships are important. So I have a few of them, but they matter so much to me. And they're so important to me that I would never want to do anything that would jeopardize or disappoint those relationships.
You talked about poker, you talked about decision making, and outcomes still can be negative. I remember from Annie Duke's book, How to Decide, she has a very basic framework, which is very powerful. She says that most of the time, we decide the quality of our decisions based on our outcomes.
Yep.
But actually, an outcome is a combination of decision plus luck, tailwind or headwinds. And what happens is that if we have an unfavorable decision outcome, then we think we made a bad decision. And sometimes we may get a very favorable decision outcome, but we think we made a brilliant decision. But there is something in the middle, which is, you call it luck, you call it a tailwind or headwind, whatever you want to. Ultimately, what you need to do over a course of time is keep refining your decision-making skill. And eventually, hopefully, everything will line up for the right outcome. So beating ourselves over a bad outcome may not be the right way of looking at it.
It's really complicated. And Annie's framework is great and useful, but not always accurate. So yes, sometimes you make a decision and you don't get the result you want. And sometimes you do, but you can't judge on a one-off basis. You sort of need to look at a repeated set of patterns. Does this person always make this type of decision poorly? In which case, maybe they shouldn't have that responsibility, or maybe they're just bad at it. I think there's a lot that goes into that, but it's really important for you to tease out. And the language I use with my kids might be helpful here, which is like, what is your contribution to this outcome? And it can never be 100%, and it can never be 0%. So like, what is it that you did that contributed to this? And I think that if you get a bad outcome, it's really easy to ask that. But the one thing you can do to sort of like change this framework around is, especially at work or at home, if you write out your decisions and you write out your thinking, you can self-calibrate and you can look at, what was I actually thinking when I made the decision? And I've worked with organizations to implement this internally, and by and large, they almost all turn it off. And I find that super interesting because the feedback that they get is they're right a lot, but they don't know why. And so they're lucky in sort of Annie's definition of that. But I think there's a little bit more that goes into it than that. But I think it's a useful framework for sure.
So I gathered some community questions, members from the Farnam Street community. So let me go through them, and they would like to know. So the first one is, how has your mindset towards problem solving changed with experience?
The biggest shift I got from Brad Jacobs when I interviewed him. And Brad Jacobs, for those of you who don't know, is I think he's an 8-time founder. Every company he started has become worth multiple billions of dollars. He's doing it again with QXO. And if you listen to that podcast and you went out and bought QXO, you've done really well. Brad is a force of nature. And the one thing that really stuck with me in the core that I chewed on for a long time out of that podcast and his book was problems are opportunities. And I had never thought of problems as opportunities before that. And I don't know why. It's so intuitive once you reframe the positioning of it. I'd always thought of them as obstacles or one more thing to deal with or another thing on my to-do list. And I had never thought about them in terms of a positive opportunity. And it changes how you act with them and interact with them, and changes procrastination with them, and it changes your excitement that you bring to them. And there's so many opportunities to create value, and the harder the problem in a lot of ways, the better, because it means there's fewer people who are willing to tackle it.
On spirituality, what is your belief? And if you can separate beliefs about whether there is God from your first principles.
I think I'll answer a slightly different question here, in that humans have a need to feel a part of something larger than themselves. And we have a need, almost you could think of it as first principles in a way, to explain things that don't make sense. I believe in something, but I don't know what that something, what form that something takes. And, I remember being in grade school and praying before tests that I wouldn't fail, like literally kneeling on the floor and praying. And I think I still do that today, but I don't know who I'm praying to or what I'm praying to. When a friend gets ill or somebody's going through something, like I feel for them and I sort of pray for them. But I don't know what it's towards. It's like I believe in something. And I would say I try on religion in some senses. I went to church a lot last year. Never gone to church in my life. Just started showing up. And I do these things because I don't know anything about it. And I want to learn. And how can I have an opinion on something that I don't know much about? And I don't believe in just sort of like somebody telling you something and that's gospel. And so I do these crazy things. Religion's an example of one where I just went to church, I'd probably say 30, 40 times in a year. And it's hard with my travel schedule, so that's quite a bit. And then another crazy thing that I did just to like sort of interact with the world is I organized, there's this app called Time Left or Time Out. It's a French app. And it sort of connects you to strangers in your city and you have dinner together. Mm-hmm. And I found that really revealing too, where I did one a month. So I went to 12 random dinners with, 5 random people who I didn't know each. And I just like to learn more about people and things. And so circling it back to religion, I don't know if I have an opinion on it, but I do believe that there's something.
After everything you have learned, what would you say? Are you optimistic or pessimistic at the moment?
Oh, I'm so optimistic. I don't think there's a better moment to be alive in human history than to be alive today. And yes, we have our problems and it's easy to see those problems, but there's so much opportunity in front of us. I personally feel, and I might be wrong on this, but I don't make predictions often. I feel like in the next 20 years, we're going to make more progress than we made in the last 300 when it comes to science, when it comes to technology, when it comes to living a better life in a lot of ways. I think we're going to understand diseases. I think we're going to have massive progress on aging. We're really going to start to understand the world that we live in a lot better with a lot more nuance and a lot more detail. And I'm so freaking excited about that. Like I wake up excited about all of this stuff. And it's really easy to grab on to the negatives, the political situation or, the conflicts in the world or the potential for AI to cause massive disruption and job loss. And I don't go into this blind to those things. I just choose to sort of direct my attention mostly to the positives, especially because I can't really do anything about those things. If I could do something about them or have an impact on them, maybe I would think differently about them. But I find it's a trap to start getting into that, because then you start hanging around people who think like that. And then all of a sudden the world looks like it has no opportunity and no potential. And you wake up 10 years later and you're like, what have I done for the past 10 years? I didn't do anything. And be honest, like, you don't want to hang around somebody who's negative all the time. And yeah, we all have bad days, but I'm just so optimistic. I'm optimistic for my kids. I'm optimistic for the world. I think the best is yet to come. And if there's no other year that I would pick to be alive than this year, right now, right here in human history.
Learning new things can be exciting, but it can feel, well, like homework. Anything to share regarding motivation to keep learning new things, or you are just naturally wired to be a learning machine?
I think learning feels like a chore when you have to do it. I never liked it in school when somebody said, you have to read this book. But I did like reading the minute nobody was telling me what to read. And I think if it's a chore, put it down if you don't have to learn it. You don't have to finish a book. You don't have to. So often I run into people and I'm like, what are you reading? And they'll tell me this book. And I'm like, oh, like, how long has that been on your nightstand? And it's like 7 months. And it's like, well, why? And it's like, oh, it's a slog. It's terrible. It's like, well, then why don't you put it down? Like, give it away. Because we've been taught to finish what we start. And I think those are the moments where learning feels like a chore. And my whole life is sort of oriented around learning, between investing and the interviews and the sort of website. It's all geared towards learning. Like, I'm learning about people, and I find that fascinating. And yeah, and it's always changing too. So, every week there's a new guest and I'm doing new research on them. And so it doesn't sort of get dull. And I'm always following my curiosity. And I think that helps a lot. But I think if you find learning as a chore, the question to ask yourself is like, am I learning this because I have to, or if I want to? And if it's I want to, just stop it, pivot, and do something else. And if it's because I have to, is there a better source of information that I can go after? Is there a more engaging way for me to do this? Can I pop in, AirPods and go for a walk and listen to a podcast? What are the multiple ways to learn this? And I find, if I have to learn something and I don't want to learn it, one of the most effective ways for me is like time that would otherwise be null, right? So if I'm driving, I'll pop in the AirPods and I'll start a conversation with ChatGPT or Claude, and I'll just, I'll start talking to, or Gemini, sorry, and, or Grok, and I'll just talk to them and teach me about this. I don't like it that way. Make it with a funny accent, do it with this foot, rap it to me like you're Eminem, like I'll engage with it in such a different way that it can't help be fun. And I do this with my kids too. If they have a big test coming up and it's on World War II, they hate it. They roll their eyes, but they really remember things because of it.
Let's do one last one. Your current positions on active passive investing. Any views?
Man, I alternate a lot on this stuff. Every time I talk to Morgan, I sort of walk away going, passive investing is the way to go. And I do quite a bit of passive investing. And then on the flip side, I find these opportunities and I'm like, oh gosh, like this is amazing. And so I do a mixture of both. I think where I'm skewing is more towards passive, and investing is the exception, like active investing being the exception, whereas it used to be the inverse of that, which is like active was the norm and passive was sort of the exception to it. I don't know why it's changed in that way, other than I'm not doing a ton of new opportunity now. And usually what I do is, my account from a dollar cost average point of view, I own a whole bunch of SGov, which is US T-bills, 90 days. I would take the interest from that and I would apply it to an index fund. And then if there was a market correction of, more than 20 or 30%, I would take money out of SGov and pop it into index funds. But I'm not putting the interest into the index funds at the moment. I just can't sort of bring myself to do it in a lot of ways. And so I've been more and more cash over the last year. But I still find all these niche opportunities that I think are super interesting. And if you look, the last one I did was Constellation Software 2 weeks ago. Get down to $2,250 a share, $2,300 a share, and I just bought a whole bunch in there. And people were panic selling SaaS, and I'm familiar with Constellation, familiar with the type of software businesses they own. And to think that somebody's going to vibe code something that goes into a highly regulated environment or runs the machines in your machine shop is, I don't know. Maybe it happens eventually, but it's not happening tomorrow. And so I think there's these opportunities where if you're flexible and you're thinking, you can sort of make a lot of money. And that was an opportunity in plain sight. It's almost up 50% since then. And if you act like Munger, who talked about acting with conviction, you can make a lot of money in those situations, but they don't come around very often. And again, you have to be positioned to take advantage of it. Had that situation come up and I had no money available, it doesn't matter that I had the idea. And so it's always putting yourself in a position where all your options are good and making the best decision possible. But with that said, those opportunities seem to be becoming fewer and fewer. I do wonder, in a world of passive, if we've reached the point where they're actually going to come more and more now, because you just saw panic selling, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the panic selling brought down an entire sector with no discrimination for who's the best in that sector and who has the best management team and who's the most trustworthy. And you had an opportunity with them. Topicus, there's, ServiceNow would be another one where I don't think they're probably going to go away anytime soon. And that's up 23% in the past 2 weeks. Now, with that said, in those situations, I don't always hold forever. So that might be something where I'm not actively looking to.
That's interesting. I don't know if you came across that blog which talked about AI in 2028. And within that blog, they mentioned 5 or 6 companies, Amex and a few others. That blog went viral, and all those stocks took a hit.
Yeah, but everything took a hit, right? Not just those stocks. I think you have to ask yourself, what's the source of the advantage? Is it, if it's public data, there's probably no advantage. But if you look at regulatory environments or private data, there's a massive advantage. I don't think Moody's is going to be disrupted by somebody vibe coding a better model for grading bonds. Maybe it is, and I'm wrong. I just don't think that's going to happen. They have a ton of proprietary data, same as S&P. Those businesses got thrown, Moody's less so, but S&P got thrown out with the bathwater. And I think that if people are looking and paying attention, but it requires a lot of time and effort and conviction, and you're wrong sometimes, and that can be very hard.
3 books
to recommend to other people. Can I recommend Clear Thinking? No,
please, absolutely. Kidding. I recommend it.
What would I recommend people read? Well, how about instead of recommending what books other people should read, because I think books should be geared towards who you are and where you're at in life and your circumstances. I will say there's a book by Tara Brach called False Refuge, I think is the name of it. And if you're struggling in life or relationships and you're feeling lost, or True Refuge, maybe that's what it's called, that's a great book to read under those circumstances. I think if you want to be grounded in investing about what's important and what's not important, reading Poor Charlie's Almanac is just a great way to hit the topic from a different angle. I have copies for my kids. It's just a book I think everybody should sort of read at one point in their life. And I know many people who read it once a year. And it's a lot of life wisdom and a lot of investing wisdom wrapped into one. And, I read Seeking Wisdom quite a bit too by Peter Bevelin. And I find that book just a spaced repetition on a lot of the ideas that we've talked about today in a different form. Often people talk about ideas in a domain-specific way, and they can't relate to other ways. And I think that part of going back to the person who knows what they're talking about, the person who doesn't, it's being able to talk about the same ideas in different languages. And I love reading Peter because I think he's, one of the most underappreciated authors. Well, he's not even an author, he's a practitioner, but one of the most underappreciated people today. And I love connecting his language sometimes to mine is different and just making those connections. But I find spaced repetition really helpful for learning. So often we think that we've got it, we hear it once and we're like, oh, I understand this. And you do in that moment, but 3 weeks later, you don't understand it like you did in that moment. And so how do we reinforce the highest quality of information into our brain and offer ourselves a bit of spaced repetition with it?
3 people who come to your mind.
For what? Well, we talked about Matt today. So Matt.
Can you tell us who he is?
Yeah, so Matt Holland runs a company right now called Field Effect Software. They make the best cybersecurity software in the world. And this is his second company since he left the agency. His first company he sold for, with his co-founder, I think it was 300 and some million. So he knows what he's doing in this domain. And Matt is the highest quality mind that I know when it comes to understanding how operating systems work and how to prevent people from infiltrating your computer. My parents, I was so fortunate to have a mother who cared about me and a stepfather who came into my life and became a father, and in everything but biology. And I feel blessed to have them and my kids. I just love, I'm going to head back to them after this conversation and we're going to go explore Tokyo. And so I feel blessed for all those people and my friends. Like I could just go on. This could turn into like a gratitude podcast, but I'm very grateful for all the close relationships I have in my life. And I feel very fortunate to be alive, and for multiple reasons, not just the technology, but I just feel blessed to have so many incredible people in my life.
And before we close, we ask a question that you ask your guest. What does success mean to you?
I want to leave the world a better place than I found it. And that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean inspiring people. It can mean arming them with information or knowledge so they make better choices. And what they do with that is totally up to them. But I want to have an impact on other people. I want to be useful to other people. And I want to do it in a way where it doesn't matter that it comes from me. I just take pleasure in knowing that I've helped other people. And whether they go on to do incredible things because they heard something on the Knowledge Project or not, I don't need to know that. I just want to feel like I've been useful and the world's a better place because I was in it.
That's a beautiful place to close the conversation. Thank you, Shane, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful. I don't often get on this side of the mic, so.
It was brilliant having you. You are an amazing storyteller.
Thank you.
You can find the show notes for this episode and every other episode on 1%.live. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it on social media and leave a review. See you next time.